No one took anything from you. That's what makes this dangerous. You allowed it, without realizing permission had even been asked. There was no argument, no pressure, no confrontation. Just a moment where your body relaxed, and your leverage quietly left the room. This is where it gets dangerous. Charm is not persuasion. It doesn't convince you, it relaxes you. And relaxed systems don't verify access. They assume safety. That assumption is the opening. Everything else comes later. This isn't about being weak, it's about being human. Even Niccolò Machiavelli warned that the most effective power never announces itself. It blends in. It feels pleasant. Watch the pattern. They compliment you early. Not too much, just enough. They speak smoothly, without urgency. They mirror your tone. They let you finish your sentences. And while you're focused on being fair, they're quietly updating your access ledger. You start explaining, they don't. You start qualifying, they don't. You feel a small flicker of discomfort, pressure behind the eyes, a tightness in the chest. Then you override it, because nothing bad has happened yet. That flicker was the signal. You ignored it. This isn't a theory, it's what happens when warmth arrives before structure, when ease shows up before terms, when your guard drops before your awareness does. By the time you're thinking, the boundary has already shifted. Polish without friction, confidence without exposure, requests that arrive wrapped in friendliness instead of structure. Charm lowers threat detection, shifts your decision-making from logic to social harmony, and makes your frame negotiable without your consent. You lose leverage, you lose clarity, you lose standing. Because people respect boundaries they had to cross consciously. Now let's make it concrete. You're at work. They lean slightly closer, lower their voice. Smile. Hey, could you handle this real quick? You're great at this. Notice what's missing. Scope, timeline, ownership. Your shoulders tense, but you smile back. You don't want to seem difficult. You don't want to slow the momentum. You don't want to risk the subtle approval that just appeared. So you say yes. 2 weeks later, notice the asymmetry. You're overloaded. They're relaxed. Your contribution is summarized vaguely. Theirs is named clearly. That delay is the trick. The cost never shows up at the moment of agreement. It appears only after leverage is gone. That wasn't teamwork. That was an extraction, executed under charm. Here's the hidden cost. Charm trained you to associate comfort with safety. But comfort is expensive. Comfort costs authority. Now sharpen this. Do this. Pause before agreement. Not that. Explain why you're pausing. Do this. Surface terms neutrally. Not that. Soften them to avoid tension. Do this. Let silence stand. Not that. Fill it to stay likable. Silence feels rude only when you've been trained to trade clarity for approval. Tactical Script 1. Let me see the full scope before I commit. Say it flat, no apology. Tactical Script 2. I'll need clarity on ownership before moving forward. No smile, no edge. Tactical Script 3. That depends on priority and credit. Let's define it. These aren't lines, they're posture in sentence form. You're not pushing back, you're slowing the frame. And whoever controls pace, controls leverage. Midway reinforcement. Machiavelli wasn't warning about cruelty. He was warning about invisibility. The most efficient power never feels like force. It feels like cooperation. That's why people miss it, and why they pay for it later. Now pay attention to the internal motive you don't like admitting. You want to be seen as competent. You want to be chosen. You want to avoid the subtle shame of being labeled difficult. That motive is human. Unexamined, it becomes an approval tax you pay repeatedly, quietly, and up front. And the payment is always the same. Your time, your clarity, your leverage. Here's where most people fail. They think the solution is to become colder, harsher, more aggressive. That's a mistake. Aggression signals insecurity. Withdrawal signals weakness. The move is neither. The move is structured. We turn philosophy into self-mastery, not motivation. So here is the protocol. Introduced, not yet deployed. The Charm Firewall. Its purpose is simple. Prevent logic bypass under social ease. Step 1 is detection. The body always knows first. Jaw tightening, breath shallowing, posture collapsing forward. That's not anxiety. That's your system flagging unlogged access. Step 2 is delay. You insert a pause, not a reason. Silence resets the frame. Explanation weakens it. Step 3 is surfacing terms. Scope, timeline, ownership. You don't argue the request, you define the container. Step 4 is the ledger check. Who gains access? Who loses bandwidth? What moves if you say yes? If the answer is unclear, the decision is premature. Step 5 is deciding aloud, not defending, not justifying. If you explain why before the terms are clear, the firewall collapses. Here's the trade-off truth no one tells you. When you stop being easy, you lose warmth. You lose the illusion of being liked by everyone. You also lose confusion, resentment, and quiet self-disrespect. Most people don't need more confidence. They need fewer unlogged concessions. And this is only the surface layer. Because Charm doesn't just extract tasks, it extracts identity positioning. It teaches who is allowed to ask and who is allowed to define. For now, hold this. Every time you feel relaxed before terms are named, pause. That calm may not be safe. It may be the bypass. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Not just at work, not just in favors. In conversations where nothing is official. In rooms where no deal is being signed. Someone laughs easily. They agree quickly. They make you feel understood before anything is decided. Your shoulders drop. Your voice softens. You lean forward without realizing it. That forward lean matters. It signals openness. It signals availability. It signals that your frame is ready to be adjusted. You think you're connecting. What's happening is quieter. They are testing how much access they can take without resistance. Here's the subtle layer most people miss. Charm works best on people who believe they are logical. Because you trust your reasoning, you don't guard the moment before reasoning begins. That's the gap. Logic doesn't engage until after your nervous system decides, this is safe. Charm targets that pre-decision window. By the time you're analyzing, the boundary has already moved. This is why replaying the conversation later feels strange. You remember agreeing. You don't remember deciding. That mismatch creates self-doubt. You ask yourself, why didn't I push back? Why didn't I say something? And instead of correcting the pattern, you internalize it as a personal flaw. It isn't. It's a structural vulnerability. Something has already shifted, and you can feel it. You're not just listening anymore. You're recognizing patterns. Moments you used to explain away are reorganizing themselves. That conversation that felt off. That agreement you couldn't explain. That quiet resentment you blamed on yourself. You didn't imagine those moments. You misread them. And now, your body is noticing before your thoughts do. That's not a coincidence. That's awareness coming online. This is usually where people get uncomfortable, not because the idea is wrong, but because it fits too well. And once something fits, you can't unknow it. From here on, this isn't information, it's calibration. What comes next doesn't add danger, it reveals where the danger already was. Stay with it. Now sharpen your attention here. The most effective charm never feels manipulative. If it did, it would fail. It feels respectful, easy, almost generous.
That's why calling it out directly never works. If you accuse, you look unstable. If you confront, you look defensive. The power move happens earlier, before tone, before words, at the level of pace. Notice this. Charming people rush agreement, but slow clarification. They move quickly past yes and gently away from details. They'll say, "We'll figure that out later." Later is where leverage goes to disappear. This is why your body reacts first. That tightness in your chest isn't fear, it's containment loss. Your system is registering that something is moving without being logged. When you override that signal repeatedly, you train yourself to distrust your own perception. That's the real damage. Not the task you took on, not the time you lost. It's the erosion of self-trust. And once self-trust erodes, you compensate. You over-explain. You justify. You rehearse conversations that have already ended, all because you skipped one pause at the beginning. Here's a critical correction. You are not required to match someone's emotional speed. Speed is not sincerity. Warmth is not safety. Calm authority moves slower than charm. That slowness creates friction. Friction reveals intent. Watch what happens when you slow the exchange by even 5 seconds. The charming person fills the gap, or they don't. If they fill it with more reassurance, more praise, more smoothing, that's data. If they tolerate the pause, that's also data. Silence is not passive, it's diagnostic. This is where most people sabotage themselves. They sense the moment, then they rescue the other person from discomfort. They add a laugh. They soften their voice. They say, "I'm flexible." Flexibility without structure is surrender. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people rely on charm because it's the only way they can access what they want. They cannot extract through clarity. They cannot negotiate openly. So they borrow your desire to be decent. That doesn't make them evil. It makes the pattern predictable. Once you see that, you stop personalizing. You stop thinking, "Why are they like this?" And start thinking, "What is this interaction rewarding?" Charm rewards people who move fast and define late. If you slow and define early, the dynamic collapses. Now anchor this. You don't need sharper comebacks. You don't need stronger boundaries later. You need fewer early yeses. Every premature agreement teaches people how to approach you. Every unlogged concession lowers your perceived cost. And lowered cost invites repeat access. Cost is what protects value. This is why saying, "Let me get back to you," is so powerful. Not because it's evasive, but because it reasserts timing control. Timing is authority. People with authority decide when, not just what. If someone reacts poorly to delay, they weren't seeking cooperation. They were seeking access. That reaction is the verdict forming. Notice it. Don't argue with it. You don't need to punish charm. You need to outlast it. Charm burns quickly when it doesn't get traction. And when it fades, what's left is intent. That's when real negotiation can begin or end. This is the line most people never cross. They keep hoping charm will turn into fairness. It rarely does.
Fairness requires structure. Structure requires tolerance for momentary discomfort. If you avoid that discomfort, you pay for it later, with interest.
So here is the anchor to carry forward.
The moment something feels easy before it feels clear, slow down. That ease may not be generosity. It may be positioning. And positioning always precedes extraction. In the next phase, we'll move this out of work and into social and romantic dynamics, where charm doesn't just take tasks, it rewrites roles. Where saying yes too early doesn't just cost time, it costs status. And once status shifts, recovering it is expensive. Hold the pause. Hold the silence. Hold your ground before it's tested. That's not rigidity. That's sovereignty. Now we move it out of safe rooms. Because charm doesn't do the most damage where tasks are assigned. It does the most damage where roles are formed. Dating, friend groups, social hierarchies.
Rooms where no one is officially in charge, but everyone knows who matters.
This is where the charming mask stops borrowing time and starts rewriting position. You've seen this. They're warm with everyone, effortless, disarming. They don't push, they don't demand, they assume. And assumption is power when no one challenges it. You notice it in how conversations orbit them, how decisions subtly land where they want, how disagreement dissolves before it forms. Your body reacts again, a tightening, a quiet hesitation before you speak. You tell yourself you're being relaxed, open-minded. What's actually happening is role negotiation, and you're conceding without noticing. Charm in social dynamics works differently. There is no request, no favor, just expectation, quietly installed and socially enforced.
Expectation is heavier than obligation. Obligations can be refused. Expectations punish silently.
Here's the definition you need. Social charm is the ability to set expectations without stating them, then let others enforce compliance on themselves. They interrupt lightly, and no one corrects them. They redirect plans, and people adjust. They joke at your expense, and you laugh before deciding if it crossed a line. Group settings. Moments where calling something out feels awkward. Charm exploits the fear of social disruption. Your nervous system prioritizes group harmony over personal authority. And status, once lost, doesn't return through explanation. It returns through behavior, slowly or not at all. Now watch a specific moment. You're on a date. They smile, lean back, relaxed. They tease you lightly.
"You're intense," they say, laughing.
People think this is flirting. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's calibration. Your body reacts, a flash of heat. You laugh it off. That laugh is data. It tells them you'll absorb framing without resistance. From that moment, the dynamic tilts. They interrupt more. They decide the pace. They test boundaries casually. You feel yourself working to regain footing by being interesting, agreeable, impressive. You don't realize you're paying an approval tax, and it compounds fast. Here's the brutal truth. Charm doesn't dominate through force. It dominates by making resistance feel socially costly. That's why direct confrontation backfires. You look rigid, they look easy. Everyone sides with ease. This is why ancient power theory matters.
Even Niccolò Machiavelli understood that appearing harmless while shaping outcomes is the highest form of control.
Now the correction. You don't counter charm with coldness. You counter it with grounding. Grounding interrupts fantasy. Fantasy is what charm feeds on. Fantasy of connection, fantasy of mutuality, fantasy that this is just how they are. Grounding introduces reality. Here's how it looks. They tease you. You pause. Not offended, not amused, just present. That pause does more than any comeback because it breaks rhythm.
Charm relies on rhythm, flow, momentum. When momentum breaks, intent surfaces. If they back off, it was play. If they press, it was positioning. Either way, you gain clarity. This is why silence is dangerous to people who rely on charm. Silence forces them to carry the interaction, and many can't. Now we deploy the framework fully. The Charm Firewall isn't just defensive, it's diagnostic and corrective. Here's the complete operational sequence. Step 1. Detect the bodily signal. Not the thought, the sensation. Chest tightening, jaw setting, breath holding. That sensation is your jurisdiction alarm. Step 2. Slow the tempo. Shorter replies, less animation, fewer fillers. You don't withdraw, you decelerate. Step 3. Name reality, not emotion. Instead of reacting to tone, you anchor to facts.
What do you mean by that?
Say that again.
Flat, curious, no accusation.
This forces clarity. Step 4. Ledger alignment. Ask yourself silently, who is gaining a position here? Who is adapting? If it's always you adapting, the frame is tilted. Step 5. Reassert presence. You don't explain yourself. You don't perform confidence. You occupy space. Eye contact, stillness, unrushed speech. Presence is authority without words. Fail condition. If you try to win them back, if you try to restore warmth, that's when the firewall fails and the negotiable frame reopens. Now the trade-off, the truth. When you stop accommodating charm, some people cool off. They may lose interest. They may label you different. That's the cost. What you gain is more important. Predictability, self-respect. And relationships that don't require self-erasure. This also changes who approaches you. Charm-based actors look for pliability. When they don't find it, they move on. What remains are people who engage directly. Those are the only relationships that scale without resentment. Now the final layer. Charm doesn't just test boundaries. It tests identity. If you see yourself as easygoing, nice, or low maintenance, charm will exploit that self-image because you'll defend the image even when it costs you. True sovereignty requires updating identity. Not too dominant, not too alpha, too grounded. Grounded people don't rush to define themselves. They let behavior speak. And grounded behavior is slow, specific, and selective. This is why higher status individuals often appear boring at first. They don't perform.
They don't charm. They wait. Waiting filters. This isn't self-improvement. It's an observation. You're not fixing yourself. You're watching who requires you to stay small. That data is the point. Now the 3-day experiment. For 3 days, do only this. When something feels easy before it feels clear, pause. Name reality, not emotion. Then decide aloud, or don't decide at all. Watch who leans in. Watch who disappears. Comment with results only. Where you paused, what shifted, what access closed. We turn philosophy into self-mastery, not theory. Charm will always exist. It's efficient. But it only works where sovereignty is absent. And once you reclaim that, charm stops being a threat. It becomes a signal. And signals can't control you. And once charm loses control, something else becomes visible.
reality.
Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, who reaches out when you stop adjusting, who stays steady when you stop smoothing, who only interacted when access was cheap. This is where many people panic. They mistake loss of attention for loss of value. It isn't. It's filtration. Charm-based dynamics rely on frictionless access. When access gains resistance, those dynamics collapse on their own. This is why reclaiming sovereignty often feels lonely at first. You're no longer feeding the loop. No reassurance, no self-deprecation, no automatic laughter. Just presence. And presence is expensive to fake. Here's the deeper mechanism that locks this in. Social systems run on predictability. When people know how you'll react, they pre-calculate outcomes. Charm works because it exploits predictability.
You'll smooth this over. You'll laugh. You won't make it awkward. The moment your behavior becomes less predictable, power redistributes. Not through dominance, through uncertainty. Uncertainty forces respect, because respect is what fills the gap when charm stops working. Now notice the internal shift that happens next. Your body calms, not because interactions are easier, but because they're cleaner. You stop rehearsing conversations afterward. You stop second-guessing what you should have said. That mental noise was never overthinking. There were unresolved boundaries. When boundaries resolve early, the mind goes quiet. This is the telltale sign sovereignty is returning. You feel slower, heavier, more deliberate. Some people interpret this as losing charisma. You aren't.
You're losing performative responsiveness. That's the tax charm demanded. Now here's the advanced layer most people never reach. The moment you stop reacting automatically, the room changes. People begin filling your silence with assumptions, confidence, judgment, disinterest. None of that is your responsibility. Silence doesn't create projection, it reveals it. And what people project is the cost they pay when you stop regulating their comfort. Projection is the price people pay when you don't manage their emotions for them. This is where many revert. They rush to clarify, to soften, to reassure. And in doing so, they reopen the negotiable frame. Resist that impulse. Silence is not hostility, it's neutrality. Neutrality is the hardest position to manipulate. Now let's talk about reputation. Reputation doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being consistent. People respect what they can't rush. When your yes slows down, your no becomes implied. You don't need to refuse more. You need to agree less, earlier. That shift alone changes how people speak to you. Requests become cleaner. Assumptions disappear. Charm becomes optional instead of necessary. This is the moment charm-based actors reveal themselves. They either adapt or disengage. Both outcomes are wins, because what you're building now isn't popular. It's positional clarity, and positional clarity compounds. In work, your contributions are named, not absorbed. In dating, attraction stabilizes, not oscillates. In groups, people check in before deciding. None of that requires force. It requires patience. Now, let's lock the identity shift. Sovereign people don't see themselves as nice or difficult. They see themselves as precise. Precision removes drama. Drama is what charm needs to operate. Without drama, charm loses leverage. This is why calm, grounded individuals often intimidate without trying. They don't feed uncertainty. They don't absorb tension. They don't over-respond. They let interactions reveal themselves. And revelation is power. Now, revisit the core rule and burn it in. If it feels easy before it feels clear, slow down. Ease without clarity is positioning. Clarity without ease is honesty. Choose honesty. Now, the final compression. For 3 days, track only one thing. Moments where you would normally smooth, laugh, or rush agreement. Don't change everything. Change timing. Delay by seconds. Speak less. Hold posture. Watch what happens.
Some dynamics will sharpen, some will dissolve. That's information, and information restores control. Comment with results only. What changed when you slowed? Who adjusted? Who disappeared? No stories, no interpretations. Data. Because once you operate from data instead of approval, charm loses its only weapon. And what's left is you being unbypassed. And if this helped you see where you've been giving ground without noticing, subscribe. This channel is for people who want clarity before comfort and sovereignty before approval.